Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with himself, Jonathan MS Pearce. The Ukraine War news update, first part there for the 7th of February 2025. We're going to start with the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course, and you can find them in the description to the video below. Fairly typical numbers from what we've seen recently. Fairly high personnel losses, over 1,300, a slight uptick from the last couple of days, 1,340. 10 tanks lost, which is just a snip above the daily average, pretty much on the daily average. 18 troop carrying AFVs, just a snip below the daily average, and 32 artillery systems well above the daily average. So some fairly good numbers for the Ukrainians there. One anti-aircraft warfare system, that's always good to see. 96 vehicles and fuel tanks, I think, continues to show that the Russians are using an awful lot of unarmored vehicles and ATVs to do the brunt of their troop movements, and oftentimes attacking columns as well. And one piece of special equipment. No Andrew Perpetual loss list today, but let's look at a couple of other sources, get an idea of what's going on in terms of losses. The Russian army, says Chris Owicki, has suffered exceptionally high casualties in Ukraine due to what one blogger calls, quote, assault for the sake of assault. Performative attacks carried out principally to allow local commanders to inform their superiors that they have complied with orders. The Russian philologist in Ambush Telegram channel writes, quote, as an illustration of the issue of organization, I can't bring myself to write without quotation marks. Of multiple attacks, I quote one good comrade from the ground. Interesting that he talks about organization in scare quotes as if there is no organization. Quote, in a second call, at least immediately after mobilization and the influx of mobilized men, there was a command from the corps commander to the battalion commanders to conduct an offensive every day and report back. Naturally, the losses were terrible. The efficiency was close to zero. So many people were killed. We called it an assault for the sake of an assault. At the beginning of 2023, this madness reached incredible proportions. In this case, we are talking about the Seversk direction and attacks on Bilohorivka. If you know, just south of the Serebyansky forest and north of Bakhmut, there is Seversk as a town, as a city, and then to the east of there is like a chalk mine pit and some kind of mountainous hills around there that has been fought over, but there's been no real movement. A little bit around a place called Verkhnokha-Mayanska, just south of there, but no real movement in that particular area because of the physical geography, meaning that neither side will make any inroads without some serious flanking. But of course, the Seversky Donetsk River to the north of there means they can't cross, and to the south, that's where I think the Russians are going to be trying. But that there are physical constraints to the Russians having much success there. So it's interesting that that's where they have been taking huge losses, or had been in 2023. The 2nd Guards Army Corps, I remind you, was transformed to the 3rd Guards Combined Arms Army last year. Moreover, the madness of incredible proportions did not end there. In particular, similar cascades of attacks were carried out from February 2024, with a short break to replenish the exhausted brigades in the second half of April, and they finally reported up to the capture of Bilohorivka. And this, scare quotes, capture was solemnly noted in the official reports of the Ministry of Defense. Note, the Russians filmed a video of 2 men raising a Russian flag in a ruin in support of a false report of the capture of Bilohorivka. Characteristically, the understanding of the discrepancy between the reports upstairs and a real situation on the ground came to the top military leadership only in November, and only because the top officer personally came with the facts and laid out the actual situation. Yes, there are normal elements in this sick organism, otherwise our whole campaign would have been effed up. They're the ones who are holding everything together. As a result of the sudden epiphany of the Chief of the General Staff, it even resulted in the replacement of the commander of the Southern Military District, which has been led by General Alexander Sanchik since November 2024. Note, several Russian commanders were reportedly removed from command and arrested in November 2024 for making false claims about Russian advances near Bilohorivka, adds Chris Owicki. So to continue to quote, Bilohorivka generally became one of some especially cursed places, but unfortunately it was just one. There are many other sad places. Moreover, offensive madness of varying scales up to the unbelievable is in principle characteristic of all this reliable, scare quotes, reliable and confident retention of the strategic initiative, end quote, scare quotes, of ours. The cripples in assaults and fortifications will not let me lie. Therefore, heavenly powers protect our frontline aviation and help our drone pilots. So that is an anecdote, albeit an anecdote, but it is an interesting data point. And we know that the Russians keep doing this, claiming they have taken places, then having to send these assaults pointlessly at these places to then post hoc prove that they have indeed taken those places, and that ends up with the Russians losing more troops than they needed to have done. And the idea here that there's a lack of organisation, that there's a difference between perception and reality with the hierarchy, and that meat assaults are continually employed to try and take these places. Then we look at something like this. So this is War Translated, showing a video. So this is video evidence of Russian soldiers taking, or recruiters going to hospitals where people have just had their surgeries and taking them out of the hospital with their crutches and throwing them in a van to then send them again at the front line. We've seen a number of videos, drone footage, and indeed footage from Russian soldiers themselves of cripple units and people on crutches. There's a video the other day of some people on crutches going across a field, basically looking like they're going on an assault. We've seen the other day drones attack a couple of people with crutches. I don't think I showed you that because it was too inappropriate, but a guy tried to beat away a drone with a crutch, and as you can imagine, it didn't end well. And you're thinking, goodness me, what is going on with these Russian soldiers? There is so much footage of injured Russian soldiers being on a front line that these go beyond just being merely anecdotal. Now, here War Translator says, a Russian soldier complains, so again, Russian evidence being presented here in video form, complains that he and others are being forcibly taken to serve straight from the hospital the day after their surgeries. And he shows his legs there. These are genuine injuries. He mentions that they are transported to units without proper conditions and have been promised that they won't be sent into combat immediately. Scare quotes, promised there. So the idea is that he's not confident that he won't be sent into another attack, and his feet and legs are not in a good way. That is some serious injury, and yet they've been hoiked out of hospital to be sent to the front line again. Now, in the Donbass, the Russian armed forces apparently outnumber the Ukrainians 5-1, according to the Wall Street Journal, sending in unmotivated men, the Russians, under 50, with no combat experience. Ukraine compensates for its lack of infantry with drones, producing 200,000 drones a month. Western support is crucial, but Ukraine faces ammunition shortages. Interesting, first time we've heard about ammunition shortages for some time. I've already reported on Jack Lepresti. He's a former deputy chairman of the British Conservative Party. He lost his seat, I think, in the last election, and then has gone and joined the International Legion of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, according to the Daily Telegraph. He visited Ukraine at the beginning of 2023, and in November 24, he joined the International Legion. Now, Mr. Lepresti is currently working in a bespoke position which uses his skills with weapons procurement and international relations. Quote, I want to support Ukrainian people. This is for Europe. If Putin won, the ramifications for the world would be catastrophic, he said. Thank you, sir, says Anton Kherson. And that's really good. And it's good that he's not just being used in a kind of meat assault way. This is a British politician who will have skills that I'm sure can be utilised in terms of, relations and procurement, as mentioned, etc., etc. In terms of equipment losses, Max 24 and others report that over the past 24 hours, the Defence Forces of the South destroyed a Russian TOS-1A, so that's a thermobaric launcher, and an Arc-1 Lynx artillery radar system. As a Zoopark radar system I've also seen destroyed as well. So some fairly decent equipment seems to have been taken out by the Ukrainians, some Russian equipment there. Now, another sad case of defenestration. This is police in Russia want us to believe that Vadim Stroikin, who is a musician, threw himself out of his kitchen window. His apartment, where he gave guitar lessons, was on the 10th floor. A verdict, high probability of state-sanctioned murder. So a huge suspicion about this in St. Petersburg. A popular singer-songwriter who opposed the war allegedly committed suicide when police turned up to search his home after an extremist article. Quote, an extremist article. Vadim Stroikin from Yekaterinburg was allowed to go to the kitchen and kill himself. So that is fairly typical for, unfortunately, for many Russians during this war. We have another example of Russia on fire. A sorting shop of timber processing complex is on fire in the Kursk region. Another 2,000 square meter fire, a huge burning of some entity there, and yeah, this just keeps happening in Russia, doesn't it? Now, interesting that a Russian spy ship has caught fire off the Syrian coast, according to the Associated Press. The Russian spy ship Kildin, loaded with intelligence equipment, caught fire and sailed out of control near Syria on January the 23rd, according to PS01. Flames, and the AP, of course. Flames and black smoke billowed from the chimney for at least 4 hours. AP obtained audio, visual, and video and photos from a nearby NATO ship. The Kildin has not responded to the NATO's offer of assistance. The vessel is currently off the coast of Tartus, continuing to gather intelligence. Russia has not publicly acknowledged the incident. I don't know whether that's sabotage or some kind of breakdown. Now, moving on to distant strikes. Really good night for the Ukrainians in terms of the interception rate, 100% taken out, although there was damage caused by falling drone debris in places like Brovary in Kiev. No fewer than 112 drones were fired into Ukraine, 81 shot down, 31 stopped by electronic warfare simulators falling harmlessly. However, debris did cause damage in Sumy, Kiev and Khmelnytsky. But good news for the Ukrainians in their interception rates, which have been fairly variable in the last couple of weeks. Now, speaking of interceptions, I won't play it to you because YouTube doesn't like it, but here's an example of someone with small arms fire, just a machine gun, an assault rifle or something, taking out probably a Shahed drone there, Shahed 131 or 136. Really good news, and that's a low-tech solution to a problem there, and that's what you want to see. Just throwing some lead into the sky, taking out a drone, and being pretty happy about it as well. So you can go and watch that footage. It's linked in the description below. Now, Fabian Hoffman talks about this, as many did yesterday. So the rumor was that Russia sent an Oreshnik missile. It came from Forbes generally and David Axe, but not sure it actually happened. So this would be the funniest thing to have happened in a while. If true, the US or some other NATO member state with access to early warning satellites should be able to confirm it. So the claim is, again, Forbes, Russia may have launched a second Oreshnik ballistic missile at Ukraine today. So alarms did go off, but this one reportedly exploded over Russia, Astrakhan Oblast in Russia. But not everyone agrees that actually happened. So Russia attempted to launch an Oreshnik missile at Ukraine, but it likely exploded on Russian territory, according to Forbes, says no reports. Media reports suggest that the missile was aimed at Kiev but failed to reach its target. Colby Badwar, though, then comes on and says the sourcing to this is pretty thin. It's David Axe, who his heart's in the right place, but he's not always totally accurate, who should never be cited for anything, says Badwar. Citing some guy on Telegram that I've never heard of. The post on Telegram is 12 hours old, and there's still no corroboration from Russian sources. Would have footage from debris by now, and in fact, it's now generally thought to not be true. Yeah, just in case you were thinking that did happen, most people are now thinking it probably didn't. But what is interesting is that the Ukrainians are claiming to have taken out a carb guided glide bomb for the first time in the suburbs of Zaporizhia. And the idea is it might well have been from an experimental weapon. Now, we know that lasers are being used at the moment. And if that has been... If this is true, if there's an experimental weapon that has taken out a guided glide bomb, then that's excellent, because these have been the scourge of the front line. They have caused so much damage, and there's not a lot that the Ukrainians have been able to do about them. Even if you mess around with their sort of GPS and whatnot, they're still broadly going to fall in a similar place, and they're big pieces of explosive, and they just do an awful lot of damage. So that would be good if there's something that can be done. We'll have to wait to see if any more detail emerges concerning that. Okay, now on to other bits and pieces. We're going to start with Kursk region. So more problems for Russia during fighting in the Kursk region, says Tim White. Shelling a high-pressure gas pipeline in Kubyshev near Rilsky. They claim a fire has been extinguished, but gas is cut off to nearby villages. Also, damage to a power line has caused electricity outages. And staying in the Kursk region, he said yesterday, it's very difficult to tell the truth from fiction, from propaganda. However, my best guess, looking at sources available, is that the Ukrainians have advanced, as I mentioned yesterday, at Cherkasskaya, Konopelka, Ulanok, and they seem to have been doing a pretty good job around that area. To the point where today, Anton Gerashenko reports that Russian Z bloggers are talking about a, quote, operational defeat of the Russian army in the Sudzha direction, Kursk region of Russia, yesterday. Quote, Battle of Kursk 2.0, a number of commanders continue to write a history of lies and betrayal, says this Russian. On the 6th of February, the commander of the Russian Armed Forces group in the Sudzhansky direction suffered an operational defeat. It's the fault of the Russian armed forces that yesterday the enemy, that's the Ukrainians, improved their position in the Kursk region. It's very possible that today he will continue improving his positions, says this Russian source. Let's go back into it. In the command of the Russian armed forces in direction that is to blame for the fact that yesterday the enemy improved its position in the Kursk region, and it's very possible that today he will continue to improve this situation. And the command, in order to hide another lie of recent months, will again begin to drive without training fighters, increasing losses. So, some bad news for the Russians in that area, which is good news for the Ukrainians. Now, after yesterday's quick advance of the Ukrainians in the Kursk region, the Russia's 11th Separate Guards Air Assault Brigade commander, Pavel Filatyev, has been dismissed. And that is a good sign there. Sean Pinner says heavy fighting in Kursk continues with what seems to be a Ukrainian advance roughly about 4 kilometers further into Russia. Allegedly, a North Korean Special Forces officer was also captured, providing valuable intelligence, according to one reliable Ukrainian Telegram channel. Putin has also said that the situation in Kursk is now very difficult, quote, very difficult. So if Putin's admitting that, then that's saying something. On the other hand, Kherson, down on the Dnipro River, is now just a really terrible place to be. Russia's trying to drive everyone out of the city. Some districts in Kherson are almost destroyed. Russians fire at buildings, at vehicles and people. Drones are hunting for anything that moves, locals say. I mean, goodness me, who would want to live there? Horrific stuff. Russia's space chief, Borisov, has been dismissed amid program failures. Before leading Roscosmos, Yuri Borisov played a key role in Russia's military-industrial sector, overseeing the state rearmament program since 2011. And again, that's probably an indication that things aren't going too well behind the scenes. Now, we're going to get on to a bit of like peace dealy stuff. This might seem a bit overtly political for this video, but it's hard to get away from that given what's going on. So first of all, USAID, and given that there are so many USAID projects taking place in Ukraine, this really affects Ukraine. So Trump is to lay off nearly all USAID staff worldwide, according to the New York Times. The cuts will reduce the agency from 10,000 staff around the world to just 290. 3 sources with knowledge of the layoffs said. I mean, that as a percentage, that is absolutely phenomenal. Is that 97% of their staff? I don't know if I've done my correct maths there, but my goodness me, that is bad news. Now, and that will affect Ukraine. Now, Ukraine's dollar, someone asked me about bonds yesterday, Ukrainian bonds. Ukraine's dollar bonds climbed for the 5th day, hitting new highs amid rising expectations that details of the war-ending deal will emerge next week, according to Bloomberg. The country's debt rallied across all maturities, with 2034 notes topping 60 cents on the dollar. Okay, point there is that the rally is because there's supposed to be a deal coming out, and you've got Keith Kellogg going to the Munich security conference. You've got the Ramstein meeting where Pete Hegseth and I presume Kellogg will be. But there's really mixed messages coming out, okay? And we need to talk about that now, just for a wee while. So first of all, Keith Kellogg, there's talk about him being, or at least Trump being ready to double down on Russian sanctions. Now, if this is true, this is exactly what I said we wanted from Trump. Trump has a really, really strong position to absolutely screw over Russia. And you screw over Russia primarily economically with sanctions, and double down on sanctions. I was most worried about him lifting sanctions because that's what he said he might do at the Economic Club of New York, I think it was. Now, Trump's, or it might be in Chicago, Trump's envoy, Keith Kellogg, says pressure on Russia can't be military, but economic and diplomatic, with negotiations requiring concessions from both Ukraine and Russia. I would generally agree with that. However, it's not 100% sure that that's how he's going to be. Tim White says more is being made of comments by Keith Kellogg than I think is deserved. Here's a link to the interview. Trump's envoy just repeated what he said previously, that there is still room to tighten the sanctions on Russia if needed. So this is being reported very positively for Ukraine, but I think Tim White's probably on the money there by referring to the original words and saying actually there's nothing different from what's been previously said. So there are all these claims that the US has a peace plan that's imminent and that's buoying the markets, etc., etc. The reality, though, is not that. In fact, there's a massively confused reality, and this is really bad news. So bad news here: the Trump administration disbands the task force targeting Russian oligarchs like Oleg Deripaska. This is terrible. They'll soon lift the sanctions and continue business as usual, says Pekka Kaliniemi. Reuters reports. This is absolutely, when I had my big rant yesterday in my live about what's going on in America, like this really, really sums it up. This is not good for Russia. There are two things that happened. One, they basically disbanded the task force targeting Russian oligarchs. This is the anti-corruption task force where they can take control of assets. Why they would disband that, I don't know. Second of all, they have disbanded, or they are taking back the counter-terrorism and the counter-terrorism unit. Third of all is they have disbanded the department that is looking at foreign interference in American elections. Honestly, none of this is good, and none of it's good for Ukraine, and it's all good for Russia. Russia are going to be laughing with what has taken place in the last 24 hours yet again. It's like, I think, it can't get worse than this. And then it gets worse than this. It continually gets worse. It's like the American government wants to help Russia as much as possible. So really mixed messages coming out here. As Anne Applebaum says, and here it is, doors are open for kleptocracy in America, which is corruption. Breaking, Trump's Department of Justice has just killed its elite anti-corruption unit, our sources say. The Kleptocracy Initiative, famous for seizing Russian oligarchs' yachts and prosecuting the 4.5 billion one MDB fraud, was quietly disbanded last night. That is an absolute shocker. In an email sent 7:30 p.m. yesterday, Attorney General Pam Bondi announced the immediate closure of both the Kleptocracy Initiative and the Task Force Klepto Capture. The units recovered billions in stolen assets since 2010. Why would you get rid of that? Why the freaking hell would you disband those units? I don't understand. It's insane. And now we have Zelensky saying this. So when you think that, there's news that we heard that actually Keith Kellogg, the envoy to Ukraine and Russia, will no longer provide the plan at the Munich Security Conference. That was what I reported yesterday. We've now got Zelensky saying Trump has no official plan to end Russia's war against Ukraine. The US President Donald Trump does not have an official plan to end Russia's war against Ukraine, according to Zelensky, reporting to Interfax Ukraine. He was going to solve it in one day, and now the peace plan, there is no plan. I think from what we're gathering from all this different data, it's clear that there is no clear plan. If there was a clear plan for Ukraine, you would not be disbanding those kleptocracy units for a start and foreign interference, investigation departments. It's just pure insanity going on at the moment. Now, Andrew Perpetua says there's absolutely no reason for Ukraine to negotiate with Russia at all, for any reason, in the year 2025. Any negotiations should start in mid-2026, when the Russian economy has imploded, their deficits are blasting off to the moon, and Russia can no longer fight. Every country should be looking at the situation like this. We only have to get Ukraine through the next 12 to 18 months. We need to throw in the money, weapons and ammo available now to make this happen. This is not a forever war. This is a 1 year left war. We are 75% done. And I think I agree with him here. Russia will have absolutely no ability to wage war after the year 2027. Zero ability. Bringing the war into 2027 should be the threat to Russia. If we supply Ukraine through to that time period, Russia risks absolute implosion. If Russia cannot end the war by then, the nation of Russia may no longer be sustainable, and that is what we use as a negotiation tactic to get Ukraine's land back. Furthermore, there always has been the win scenario for Ukraine, always. Not counter-offensives, but it is bringing Russia to the brink and forcing them to leave willingly. This is how Ukraine wins. This is exactly what I've said for ages now. You win by Russia imploding and willingly leaving the country, not in a military victory. That's how Ukraine wins. It was always their path, and victory has never been closer than it is right now. At the end of the day, Russia cannot post $50 to $100 billion annual deficits. They have nobody to borrow money from. The only way to fund the war would be through enormous levels of inflation and mass layoffs. The entire economy would fall apart, every sector of it. Russia has no cushion left. They do not have liquid assets to last more than a few months at most. There are no alternatives left. Russia is standing with its heels at the edge of the cliff and being forced to keep backing up another step, and it will fall. This is why Russia went all in 2024. They used every single drop of power they had, every single area. Propaganda, which most of you fell for, mobilization, throwing forth vehicles, missiles, drones, everything. Cutting electric lines to countries, cutting sea cables. But ultimately, none of it worked in Ukraine. They failed. They didn't capture enough ground. They didn't weaken the Ukrainian government. Now Russia is screwed. And all we have to do is survive one more year while Russia burns the last of their midnight oil. And you know the point where Russia is well and truly effed. It will be the day Putin says he wants to negotiate. When Putin wants to negotiate, that means wait 6 to 8 more months. That is the day negotiations should start. I guarantee you Putin will want to start soon. Negotiations should go like this. Putin asks, you say we're not ready yet. Wait 6 to 8 months. Putin will ask again. You agree to start. Make it drag on for 6 to 12 months. Every day that passes, Putin gets weaker and more eager to end things. Eventually, he will give you what you want. Boom. Perfect. I totally agree with that. That's a plan. Why is it that Andrew Perpetua appears to have a greater plan than the Trump administration? I don't know. I don't know. He has more clarity than they do, and I don't think they know what they're doing because they're all over the shop and they're doing half the stuff they're doing is entirely the wrong thing to hit Russia. Half the stuff they're doing is to the benefit of Russia. Directly. Cutting US aid, cutting kleptocracy, cutting departments that investigate foreign influence on your own elections, cutting counterintelligence and counterterrorism, cutting the CIA, cutting the FBI. All of those things are exactly what Russia wants. It just blows my mind. Anyway, there you go. That's enough from me. Take care. Speak soon.